Can I have everybody's attention? If everybody can find a seat or a comfortable standing position. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody here. It is a pleasure to have all of you, and it's a pleasure to see the surprise on Bob's face, just seeing all of his dear friends for so many years. And really, this gathering today is about friendship and really how long friendship lasts. And again, I want to thank each and every one of you for attending. I'm going to be short on my little remarks here, and I'm going to turn it over to Robert, Bob's son, and he's got a little bit more to say than what I do. So, Robert?
Thank you first for all being here for Dad's official birthday party, although his birthday was back on May 1, which we know was May Day, but we're all excited, and even though Dad's birthday is every day, as he always tells me all the time, this is a special birthday party, and I'm really so pleased to have so many good friends and aviation legends and just individuals that are not only close friends, but individuals that have made their mark in history today to be here, and I know Dad is very excited to have all of you here, as I am. I'd like to, before I begin, I just want to extend a few thanks. First off to Tom, Lee, and Sally for coming up with the idea and helping to put this party together. Along with Jamie, I've got others, so hold your applause. I've got Jamie Markowitz, who's been an incredible help, and Roger Mason and Bob Cutting, and also, of course, we've got a special thanks to David Price, who has provided the venue for today's party. So thank you so much. You know, we had one special guest I was hopeful was going to be here today, and that was Louis Zamperini, a very close friend of Dad's. And he really needs no introduction. He's, of course, with the book Unbroken and the upcoming movie. And we had hoped that he was going to be here today, but unfortunately he's under the weather, so he was not able to make it today, but I'm sure he's here in spirit with us. So, Louis is, for those who don't know, he just was selected the Grand Marshal for the upcoming 2015 Rose Parade. So I was hoping at least he could bring maybe the Queen and some of the court, because the ladies seem to love Louis, I noticed. Well, I'd like to begin just by stating, who is Bob Gilliland? And, not only is he my father, but, I've had a lot of comments from friends over the years, close friends of Dad, those that have met him and know him, and they've said things like he's charming, courteous, a Southern gentleman, outstanding person, a very loyal friend. He's got a great sense of humor. He's brilliant. Sharp as a tack, incredible memory, that's for sure. He can remember everything. He's very cool under pressure. He's a patriot and a warrior, and he's fiercely independent. You don't notice, he usually doesn't like backseaters. And he's a good citizen, and of course a top pilot, quick-witted, but Dad doesn't suffer fools, that's for sure. But the thing that's amazing about my father is that he has such a broad range of friends. Anyone from the Prince of Wales to the average person on the street. Dad can sit down and have a fantastic discussion with any of them, and meaningful. And Dad not only is a classy guy, but he's very positive, and he's just a nice guy. And one of my favorites, of course, about Dad is that he is the father of Robert Gilliland Jr., my personal favorite. But in any event, we're very blessed to have all of you here today, and I really appreciate it. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Dad, and I'm going to try to multitask by speaking and doing this PowerPoint presentation. I usually at trial have a paralegal doing this, so I'll do my best. And as usual, it's not working. Okay, there we go. All right. Well, there's a little description of Dad. So true. And then I want to talk to you about Dad's early childhood for a moment. This is a great photo. It was taken, I believe, in Arkansas at the family farm. Dad was born in Memphis, Tennessee on May 1st, 1926. And he was the oldest boy of 3 boys to Frank and Elizabeth Gilliland. And in the photo, you'll note there's Dad in his knickers with his brother Frank. And he's got the leather caps, pretty stylish. And you can note the swag that my father has. He's the one on the right. You know, you see a little attitude there. And you know, it was inevitable that my dad would be in aviation. Of course, being May 1st. And you know, when I look back and can you consider the history, considering that the U-2 spy plane, which was piloted by Francis Gary Powers, was shot down. Well, I should say it was hit with a proximity fuse on a SAM missile. The tail blew off and he was overflying Russia. That was May 1, 1960. And of course, it had to be my dad's birthday because then thereafter, the successor to the U-2 was the SR-71 Blackbird. Well, this next slide I'm going to show you is a picture of a model airplane that my father actually built at age 7. And in fact, it's on the table over there. My Uncle Jim, Dad's youngest brother, was able to find this plane that had been built so many years ago in my grandmother's attic, and he's kept it, and he wanted to be here. And unfortunately, we had a conflict and couldn't be here, but he sent this plane out, and as you can see, my dad, his piloting skills far exceed his aircraft design and building skills, luckily. But you know, it's really, Dad has been fascinated with aviation since early age, but what is rather strange is that my father comes from a family of attorneys, a long history of attorneys. And his father was a very prominent attorney, and also both of his brothers attorneys, and I happen to be an attorney. And I remember I had a discussion once with Dad, and I said, Dad, isn't that kind of strange? You're the only one in the family that didn't end up being an attorney. You're a pilot. I mean, were you the black sheep in the family? And Dad, being quick-witted, said, no, I'm the blackbird in the family. Just a little comment on my grandfather, Dad's father, Frank Gilliland. Give you a little insight. I think this tells you a little bit about my father. My grandfather, Frank Gilliland, as I mentioned, he was a very prominent attorney in Memphis. And in fact, he once owned the Sterk building, which was the tallest building in the South until 1957, and he was a World War I hero. In fact, he was an officer and fought in the trenches in Germany and helped to break what was the impenetrable Hindenburg line, and near the French town of Bellicourt, France. And so that gives you a little insight on, I think, with my father's background. All right, the next photo I'd like to show you is, of course, after my father had attended Webb School in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, he then was accepted into the academy and over at Annapolis. And what's interesting is that the academy was founded in 1845 by the Secretary of Navy, George Bancroft. And the interesting part too is that Dad was, he entered the class in 1945, the 100-year anniversary. And you can see there's a great shot of Annapolis with the buildings in place. And Dad was, of course, an outstanding student at the academy, and he also had, not only did he excel in the academics, but he also excelled in the demerit department as well. In fact, I'm not sure that Senator McCain ever really met my dad's record over at the academy when it came to demerits. But I have an interesting story I wanted to share briefly. One of Dad's classmates at the academy, Captain James McVoy, he documented an event that occurred back in the day when Dad was rooming with Ham Perkins and Mel Davis at the academy. And as he said, as plebes, they drove the upperclassmen crazy, and for the next 3 years earned more demerits between them than any room in the academy. And then he also goes on to say that apparently, here's the story. Mel's mother had sent a cake to her son, and they had it in the room apparently for many weeks, and of course they never finished it, but it just sat there. You know how boys are, they don't always clean up. And so it just got stale. And apparently it was that Saturday morning was the room inspection where they were going to have to make sure that everything was clean and in top shape. And so the question was asked, and I'll read this now. This is the actual quote of what happened. It says, "Bob's a delightful fellow, tall and full of fun with a great sense of humor. Get him to tell the story of the time they, as plebes, were getting ready for Saturday morning room inspection and didn't know what to do with the remains of a now stale cake Mel's mother had sent up to them. Bob asked Ham, who happened to be, quote, in charge of room at the time, what he wanted done with it. Ham, frequently frustrated by Bob's unflappable and somewhat haughty manner, told Ham he could throw it out the window for all he cared, which Bob immediately did, eventually, to the courtyard below. This was 10 days before the Army-Navy game, and the cheerleaders had removed Billy, the Navy goat, the mascot, to the courtyard to protect Billy from kidnapping by the West Point Cadet Commandos, who like to try to come in at night before the game or near the game and kidnap the mascot for the game. And by the way, that game was lost, unfortunately, by the Navy. But here's what happened. What they didn't realize is that when the goat got in, and unfortunately it passed away, and they ate the cake, and so Ham, Bob, and Mel knew that their lives wouldn't be worth a plum nickel if it came out that it was their cake, as they kept mum until their 50th reunion, when Ham accounted for it. Bob, amazing story. While Dad was at Annapolis, he also had the opportunity to serve on several ships. In fact, after his plebe year, he served on the U.S. North Carolina battleship. And his GQ was the 16-inch gun, and he also occasionally had the opportunity to take the wheel or helm, of course being directed by the officers behind. And they cruised to Guantanamo Bay and to Panama. And then on his second cruise, he was fortunate enough to be on the U.S. Randolph aircraft carrier, and that's CV-15. And that was for historical purposes, that was the carrier that picked up John Glenn after John Glenn made his historic orbital flight, and they picked that was the carrier. On Dad's third cruise, he went on the USS Macon, and it's a heavy cruiser, I think it's CA-132. Namesake after, of course, Macon, Georgia. And so Dad had a lot of fun experiences on the ship as a midshipman. That's the insignia for the class of 1949. Dad was a 49er, and which is interesting because you see the words in Latin, non sibi sed patria, which stands for not for self, but country. And in fact, my understanding is that it's inscribed on the chapel doors at the U.S. Naval Academy. Well, here's where we go. Dad goes to the Air Force, even though he's a Naval Academy graduate. In fact, he's told me before many times that he has wings of gold and silver. And so as he went off to go fly the jets, he had to start off, and he started off at Randall Field as a young man flying the T-6, and he soloed there, did all this flight work early on. And then eventually, from there, he moved on to Chandler, Arizona, to Williams Air Force Base, flying the P-47 Thunderbolt, and then also the P-80 Shooting Star. And of course, the P-80 Shooting Star was a Kelly Johnson designed airplane. And while at Chandler, of course, Dad also, he played on there was a baseball team for the Air Force, and he was quite good at it. He was a star on the baseball team. He eventually rotated over to Germany, to Newbyberg, to fly the P-80, and also, again, as I mentioned, the P-47 Thunderbolt, which Dad referred to it as the hunk of junk. And he met the likes of gentlemen like Joe Kittinger, flight attendant friend of him. Well, Dad eventually then transitioned into jets. And in fact, while Dad got over to, he ended up rotating over to Korea and flying the F-80 104 straight wing Thunderjet built by Republic. And he was based at K2 in Daegu, Korea. And as you can see in the photo on the right, yes, that's Dad sitting on 1,000-pound bombs. He then, after his rotation in Korea, flying against MiGs, he then rotated back to Germany to fly for approximately 9 months before heading off to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, where he had the opportunity to fly most of the inventory in the U.S. Air Force. And at that time, thereafter, he was able to then transition to the Tennessee Air National Guard, where he got to fly one of his favorite airplanes, the F-104 Starfighter, which I will talk about, in a short bit. But also during this time that Dad was flying at Eglin, and then later when he flew for the Tennessee Air National Guard, he was able to quite efficiently and proficiently develop his buzzing skills on the Florida beaches and even in Memphis, and when he joined the Air Guard. And luckily, Dad, he flew so fast that the disgruntled parties had a very difficult time ever getting his tail number on his planes that he would fly. But the irony is that Dad would graduate from buzzing beaches and buildings to dropping sonic booms all over Southern California later through his aviation career. Here's a great picture, one of my favorites of Dad, and as we're going to transition now into his Lockheed years. And in 1960, Dad's career took an amazing turn when he was hired as a test pilot, a civilian test pilot, to fly all models of the F-104 Starfighter. In fact, Dad has told me many times that's clearly one of his favorite airplanes. In fact, if you want to have Dad pause to consider, it's pretty hard when you ask him which airplane did he enjoy flying more, the 104 or the SR-71. And I know he loved them, flying them both. The Red Hot 104, that's a real fast machine, and it has a lot of nicknames. The Man in the Missile, the Widowmaker, and as Dad said, if you ever had a flame out, the airplane actually glides like a toolbox, apparently. And by the way, Dad had 5 dead stick landings in the 104 successfully to land the plane. Here's another wonderful shot. You see the wingtip, very thin, and you can just see it's a high-performance plane. This next photo, or slide, I'm going to show you 2 photos. The top left is a photo of General John A. Dunning, United States Air Force General, where Dad was training him and checking him out on a 104. And he trained and helped check out many U.S. as well as NATO pilots, and including some of the German pilots and other foreign nation pilots. He trained with. He trained Johannes Steinhoff and also Gunther Rahl from Germany, both World War II aces. In fact, Steinhoff had 176 victories, and Gunther Rahl had 275 victories. And if you look in the photo in the lower right, I'm going to show you, this is on the flight line out over at Edwards, and you'll see these are the German pilots, and Dad's right here pointing off into the distance. But if you see this gentleman right here, this gentleman is Gunther Rahl. And what's really noteworthy is if you look at his left hand right there, he doesn't have a thumb. In fact, because he was shot down 8 times and he was wounded 3 times, and during one of the dogfights, he lost his left thumb. Dad's involvement in the 104 was he was heavily involved in the 104, working for Lockheed. And then I'm going to fast forward for just a minute, because in 1978, one of the other Lockheed test pilots and a good friend of Dad's, Darrell Greenemeier, had been acquiring parts of the F-104s that had crashed, and he actually built a privately owned F-104 called the Red Baron. And he put a beautiful paint job on it. It was red with white stripes. And so Dad, along with Darrell, then embarked on breaking the low altitude speed record in the F-104, which it was accomplished in 1978. And so that was another involvement that Dad had with the 104. The next slide I'm going to show you is this is a photo of Dad actually in the 104 cockpit. And this photo was actually taken in approximately 84 when he was over at the Republic of China in Taiwan, where he was asked to go over and teach the Taiwanese pilots how to fly this highly modified 104 that had some surveillance camera equipment in the nose. And so the CG was completely changed, and so they wanted a veteran test pilot to come out and check out the pilots. And so, again, Dad was involved in all aspects of the 104. The next slide I want to show you is, of course, the Skunk Works. And that was when Dad flying the 104 for Lockheed, he caught the eye of Kelly Johnson. And Kelly Johnson, of course, we all know, was the founder of the Skunk Works, and he's, as Dad says, the Leonardo of Da Vinci of aviation. In fact, he has designed more aircraft, well, I think it was 4/5 of aircraft, significant aircrafts that are flying today, and how it incorporates some aspect of his designs. And of course, the most amazing part about Kelly Johnson, not only does he design the 104, but he also, in many other airplanes, but also the SR-71. And in fact, that's the ultimate masterpiece. And in fact, there's some slide of the SR-71 that shows the lines on the plane. And this all occurred in the late 50s and early 60s. An airplane so far ahead of its time that time didn't even essentially catch up with it. Here is the Blackbird family, we call it. There's three versions: the A11, the YF-12A interceptor version, and the SR-71. When Dad was introduced to the program, he was a test pilot on the initial Blackbird family, the A11. It was a single-seat version, and he was then that airplane eventually worked and became the airplane of choice for the CIA to succeed the U-2 that, of course, I mentioned earlier had been shot down. And Kelly knew it, or only knew it at some time, that the U-2 would be shot down. So this new technology that had never been done before was then introduced. This airplane made out of titanium. It gets hotter than a self-cleaning oven, flies faster than a .30-06 bullet. This was introduced to the world. And as a result of my dad's flight work, he received what is called the Ivan Kinchlow Award, and that is given to the most outstanding test pilot or astronaut for flight test. And in fact, the Mercury 7 astronauts received it the year before, but my father received it. And I believe, I'm not sure if Dorothy Kinchlow is here, but she was invited to be here, and I was hoping she was going to be here, but it's named after Ivan Kinchlow, the very highly regarded and respected test pilot who was flying a 104, unfortunately had a flame out at low altitude, attempted to eject, and unfortunately was killed in the accident. And so the award was named after him in his honor, and it's highly regarded. The YF-12A, as I mentioned, was the interceptor version that they had SAM missiles on. It never went into full production. The airplane of the Blackbird family that did was, of course, the SR-71. And by that time, Kelly Johnson had a very good understanding of what my dad's skills were. And as of with the test pilots that were on the program, he handpicked and selected my father to be the chief test pilot. You know, it's interesting, the SR-71, unlike the A11, is a two-seat airplane. Its design speed is Mach 3.2, which is approximately 2,193 miles an hour. And it has a titanium body, as I mentioned, and it leaks JP7 fuel. It's fueled by JP7 fuel, but it leaks JP7 fuel because if you've ever been around an SR-71, you'll see that it leaks once it's done with its mission. And that was one of the challenges that the engineers had, was trying to seal the airplane so they wouldn't leak. And it was far better to have it leak on the ground than, I guess, in the air. And so that was how the technology. And by the way, Hal Weber's here, and I want to just put a note to all of you. Hal was involved in the instrumentation of the SR-71. So, Hal, you're a hero in my book. The other thing is, you know, that's interesting about this airplane, because it's such a great looking airplane. Hollywood loves this airplane. In fact, many movies feature it. It just looks like it's even sitting on the ground. In fact, that you see there's a picture of the SR-71 over there to my right, and that is the best shot, no doubt. The front end shot, you see the clean lines, And I mean, it's just an incredible airplane just sitting on the deck. Dad was chosen by Kelly Johnson to make the first flight of the SR-71. And you know that there would have been a lot of pilots who would have given their eye teeth to be able to been in his position. And you wonder, and I've always thought to myself as a boy, why did Dad get to be the guy? Why did Kelly pick him? And as I've gotten older, I've been able to figure that out fairly quickly. And one of the things is that Dad has an innate sense of balance. His quickness that made him an accomplished athlete and fine aviator. And also, I think it was Kelly's comfort with his ability to diagnose aircraft idiosyncrasies on the fly. I mean, after all, when you're a test pilot and you're flying this fast stuff, you've got to make quick decisions, as if you're a fighter pilot or a test pilot. And also, I think it was the fact that Dad had a quick understanding and a rapport with the design engineers, of being able to sit down with them and ask them a lot of questions. Dad's really good at that. I think that's where I got my cross-examination skills from. And so he would, and ask him about this. Never tried technology before, and try to get a full understanding of what the plane is all about. Well, this next slide is a picture of the actual first flight of the SR-71. It occurred on December 22nd, 1964, and Dad is in the, of course, in the plane in the photo, and behind him is a 104, and that's a chase plane flown by Jim Eastham. He was also another Blackbird pilot. On the first flight, Dad did not have a backseater. All the instrumentation was jerry-rigged to the front seat, so that he was able to have full access and control as needed. The other interesting part to me was that there were apparently over 300 items open on the plane for the first flight that had not yet been resolved. But the fact that it was a milestone program, which Dad didn't know at the time, that Kelly wanted to make sure that this flight was that it occurred before January 1, because if it did, then Lockheed would receive bonuses. And if it was a first flight with wheels up, there was another bonus. And if it was a Mach flight, if you broke a Mach 1, it was another bonus. And so Dad told me that Kelly approached him a few days before the first flight and said, "How do you feel about a wheels up on the first flight?" Dad said, "I'm fine either way. I'm comfortable with the ejection system. I talked to the engineers. I know. I'm fine with it." And so Kelly said, "Let me think about it. I'll get back to you." Well, sure enough, Kelly came back and said, "Let's do it. We're going to go wheels up." And so that's what happened. And by the way, my sister Ann is here, and we were actually both there that day. Except I was quite young as she was, so I think the only thing that I did was cry when it went flying over, screaming and loud. But it was a great day in aviation history. Here's another photo of Dad in the SR-71 cockpit wearing the moon suit. That just tells you the hostile environment that you're going to be flying this airplane in, cruising at 80,000 feet, going 3.2 Mach, because God forbid the glass breaks in the canopy. You better have that moon suit to protect you, otherwise your blood boils and you're instantly dead. Here's a shot of Dad near the airplane, getting, I believe, ready to fly with his backseater that he did many test flights with, Dick Miller. And you can see those yellow boxes that are hooked to their moon suit. Those are actually air conditioning units, because it gets so, according to Dad, tremendously hot wearing this moon suit, just trying to even get into the plane before you hook into the plane for the air conditioning. And Dad I remember told me, he used to complain, he told me to the engineers about that when he would come off a test flight, he'd be soaked in his drench because it was so hot wearing the moon suit. And he said, "Can you do anything to improve the air conditioning?" And the retort was, "Well, yeah, but we'd rather keep the black boxes cool first." So this is approximately 1970 at Edwards Air Force Base. And here's another picture. Dad in front of the Blackbird. If you note, over Dad's left shoulder, you'll see a stripe on the nose of the plane. And that is actually the prototype SR-71. The very first one was called the Article, tail number 950. And you can see that this is the plane that was highly instrumented. that had all of the critical instrumentation, because Kelly, as Dad told me, believed in instrumentation. If you have enough instrumentation, you can get to the answer. And so it was critically important that the airplane on the first flights be successful, because you could imagine if you have a disaster and you crash your prototype airplane, you've now set the program back years and cost the company millions and millions of dollars. That plane actually later in the program did end up crashing with another test pilot at controls. And I think it's really amazing the fact that Dad, every SR-71 that rolled off the line, Dad made the first flight on. And amazing, not one of them crashed when he was at the controls. Way to go, Dad. And of course, here's a shot of Dad, and since retiring from Lockheed, he's kept extremely busy when he was when he's not skiing, but also as general manager of DeSoto Oil and Gas, and also owned a hotel in Palmdale. And he's been a frequent speaker on aviation all over the world, and so he's definitely kept busy. This next photograph are just some of the what I call living legends, friends of Dad, and there's so many of them here today that I can't even begin to start, but you'll see these are men that have cheated death many times, and some of Dad's longtime friends, and certainly heroes of mine. And in fact, the one over on the left, you probably recognize them. Those are photos. That's a photo with General Bob Cardenas in the red shirt, and of course Colonel Joe Kittinger and myself with Dad. And that's at my old house. And then to the lower right is Bob Hoover, and I believe that was taken at the SETP Awards several years ago. Of course, there's more friend shots. We've got a picture of Dad's longtime friend, Louis Zamperini, over in the left-hand corner, wearing his traditional USC hat. And as Dad says, he's the world's greatest survivor on planet Earth. And then Louis' retort is, yeah, but Gilliland, he's the fastest man alive. And then, of course, on the right, there's a picture of Louis, and then Jamie Markowitz with me in more recent times. Here's another slide of Dad, and Dad did something that was truly remarkable. It was on March 3rd through 2010. He was part of the Legends of Aerospace tour that went to the Middle East, and was able to visit many of our troops abroad. In fact, the legends, we have some legends. I know we've got Mr. General Steve Ritchie's here, and I believe it's David Hartman here as well. Yes, he is somewhere. But I'll just tell you that David Hartman's going to provide more detail about the trip. But as you can see, the legends from left to right. Of course, the moderator was David Hartman, and then to his left is Neil Armstrong, and then Gene Cernan, the last man on the moon. Next is Jim Lovell, Apollo 13, and General Steve Ritchie again, who's here with us today, and his wife, and also then my dad. Here's a great photo that was taken on the aircraft carrier, the USS Eisenhower CDN-69, and they were under, I believe, an airplane. They actually signed a bomb that was going out on a raid. In fact, I remember Dad tells me the story where he said that Neil Armstrong didn't like to sign autographs, rarely did. And one of the pilots came up and said, "Would you please sign this bomb?" And all the other legends had signed it except for Neil Armstrong, and he hesitated for a moment, and then he asked, he said, "When's this plane going out?" And they said, "It's going out within the hour." He goes, "Okay, I'll sign it. Regards, Neil Armstrong." And in this photo, there's a picture to the left. That's Neeson Davis, who's here. And also we have, that's Jim Lovell, Dad, and Neil Armstrong. And here is a shot of Dad's family, my family. To the left is, of course, upper left, that's my sister, Ann. She's a medical doctor up in Reno, and she came down for today's event. I'm so glad to have her here. And then also to the right is a photo of Jim Gilliland. That's Dad's younger brother, taken many years ago from when we lived in Lockingham Flint Ridge. And that's if you look over Jim's left shoulder, that's JPL in the background there. And then, of course, boy, time flies. I was going to say recent times, but then I look at my kids and I say, no, it's not recent. But this is a picture of Dad's grandchildren in the photo. And my son Scott is the little boy to the right in red shirt, and my daughter Heather, the little blondie, holding Dad's hand. So I can just tell you that Dad rarely fails to mention his grandchildren in conversation. So, and then here is an event that just occurred recently, and this was the Blackbird Air. It was the Blackbird Air Park up in Palmdale. They had the 50th anniversary of the first flight of the Blackbird, and rather than hold it in December when it's freezing cold in Palmdale, they had it in much more reasonable weather, which was just in April. It was April 26th. And you can see in the photograph that there's Steve Ritchie, who's got the mic, and Steve's here today. Dad likes to always say that Steve is the next Kelly Johnson, and we're glad to have him here. And he's just given Dad it's the prized bronze skunk award. So I guess it's highly coveted in Lockheed, but it's certainly a very cute award. Thank you very much for doing that, Steve, for your efforts. I really appreciated that. It's a great day. And also, I'd like to just add that Mr. Ken Collins is also here, and he was also an A-11 Blackbird pilot, flew for the CIA, and actually was almost killed in a Blackbird in a inverted flat spin. I managed to get out luckily, and we're glad you're here today with your beautiful wife as well. Thank you. And of course, the next generation, and that's Dad. Dad always enjoys providing an autograph for a youngster, and he's always interested in aviation and aviation enthusiasts, and that pretty much sums up Dad right there. And then lastly, I just want to say that in closing, that Dad, we are so happy that you're here, and we are very proud of you, and we love you. Thank you.
So thank you, Rob. That was a terrific presentation. What I'm going to do next is show you a very quick 3-minute video that was used during the Legends of Aerospace tour over to the Middle East for our troops. We did an intro for each of the 5 legends, and this was the piece that was done on Bob. And David Hartman's going to join us in a few minutes. He's going to be the voiceover that you hear on this video.
Only 12 men have left their footprints on the surface of the moon. 2 of them are with us here. Only 3 men have ever flown a crippled spacecraft back to Earth from near the moon. 1 of them is with us. Only 2 American fighter pilots achieved ace status in Vietnam by shooting down 5 enemy aircraft. 1 of them is with us. And only 1 man was the first to fly the world's fastest airplane. He is with us. These 5 men are true legends of aerospace. We're in fast company today. Astronauts whose spacecraft flew to the moon at 5,000 kilometers an hour, a jet fighter race who flew in combat at Mach speeds. Even in this group, Bob Gilliland's accomplishments shine. He has logged more Mach 2 and Mach 3 experimental flight test time than any other pilot. Bob's career of flying fast got off to a modest start. He soloed in 1949 in a T-6 Texan, which had a top speed of 208 miles an hour. But things quickly got a lot faster. In the Korean War, Bob flew the F-84 Thunderjet, That's a fighter bomber with a cruising speed of 475 miles an hour that was capable of hitting 622 miles an hour. In 1960, Bob joined Lockheed, working as a test pilot at the company's famous secret Skunk Works, it was called, in California. There, he flew the F-104 Starfighter, the first combat aircraft capable of sustained Mach 2 flight. It was this plane, the highly secret Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird, that would seal Bob's place in aviation history. On 22 December 1964, Bob climbed into the cockpit of the Blackbird and took it up for its very first flight. The SR-71 roared skyward with maximum afterburner thrust. A legendary pilot was taking the first ever flight in a legendary airplane. Bob took the Blackbird to 50,000 feet and hit Mach 1, an amazing start for an amazing airplane. Although the Blackbird maiden flight was 45 years ago and the plane was retired by the Air Force in 1998, to this day, the SR-71 holds the world's record for the fastest and highest flying, air-breathing, manned aircraft. SR-71s have flown at nearly 2,200 miles an hour at an altitude of 85,000 feet. It's flown coast to coast in under 2 hours and from New York to London in 1 hour, 54 minutes, 56 seconds, an average speed of Mach 2.68. As the SR-71 program grew, Bob continued to be the first pilot to fly each Blackbird that became operational, a job that gave him that world record of logging more experimental supersonic flight test time above Mach 2 and Mach 3 than any other pilot. Over his career, Bob has logged 6,500 hours of flight time.
I'd like to introduce now David Hartman, who was our voiceover, as you heard, and our terrific moderator on the aerospace tour. Of course, you all know him as the first host of ABC's Good Morning America from 1975 to 1987. He's also been an actor. He starred in the 1970s as that young resident Dr. Paul Hunter on The Bold Ones, the New Doctors, and as a teacher in the series Lucas Tanner. Had to do it, sorry, had to do it. After college, he served for 3 years active duty as an officer in the U.S. Air Force in the Strategic Air Command. And before you leave today, be sure to wish him a happy birthday as well, because it's tomorrow.
I'm not a techie, man. What do I do? Hi, everybody. Thank you very much. Rob mentioned the first tour we did. It was about 4 years ago. And Bob, Steve Ritchie, who's here, you'll hear from him in a little while, Neil Armstrong, Jim Lovell, and Gene Cernan. 5 iconic aviators, national heroes, and they were invited to go to Southwest Asia and meet with the troops. I was invited to be panel moderator on this trip. So we made the trip, a 10-day trip. We went to the Persian Gulf area, and over the next 10 days, went to several of the bases in the Persian Gulf area, and the Eisenhower, which was mentioned a few minutes ago by Rob Jr., during flight ops in the Northern Arabian Ocean when Hornets were flying to Afghanistan. During those days, these 5 iconic aviators met one-on-one with literally thousands of our young men and women in uniform. And think about the fact that most of them were in their teens and 20s, maybe a few in their 30s and 40s, but most of them were very, very young. And the purpose of this trip for these 5 incredible men was to thank each and every one of them personally for serving their country on active duty. I listened and watched these conversations by the hundreds, maybe more than 1,000, And I cannot tell you how moving that experience was, not only for the young men and women in uniform to meet these iconic guys, but I think it was equally as moving an experience for all of them. You know, and that brings up a point about expressing our appreciation for those who serve in uniform. I don't think we can have enough events where we can do this. And recently we have come to think that, and heard that the World War II warriors, right, were the greatest generation. I think we should expand that and include those who fought in Korea, those who fought the 15 years in Vietnam, and certainly the volunteers who have worked in Iraq and Afghanistan and continue to in Afghanistan. I would like to think that we should express our appreciation to all of them, call them the generations, not just the greatest generation, but the greatest generations, and include all of these young men and women. So the trip back, after this incredible journey in the Persian Gulf, we stopped on the way back in London. And so the guys could do an appearance. It's what's called the Royal Society. It is the oldest organization bringing together the greatest scientists in the world, and it is the oldest such organization in Western culture. The gentlemen made their presentation, and when it was over, we decided where we were going to have dinner, and the next morning we were going to fly back to the States. Bob said, could I invite, would it be okay to invite a couple of Brit friends of mine who were aviators to join us for dinner? And everybody, of course, said, yeah, that'd be great. Well, the two men joined us. And we sat around, this gang, and had dinner, and it turned out to be one of the most extraordinary dinner evenings I think any of us have ever had, for this reason. Now, mind you, you have the gang I just mentioned. They're all iconic and firsts and all of that in aviation and space. But the two guys were a guy named Andy Green. He's an RAF fighter pilot. But his other big claim to fame is that he holds the land speed record. And in 1997, he drove a vehicle at Mach 1.036, 768 miles per hour in a car. 2 years from now, the plan is, if they get the technology worked out, that he is going to drive another vehicle 1,000 miles an hour. That's coming up. Keep an eye out for it. But here are all these aviation engineers sitting around the table, and of course they were absolutely fascinated to invite Andy to talk about this remarkable technology to make this vehicle to go supersonic in a car. Well, that was Andy. The other guy, his name is Eric Brown. He's in his 90s. He is the most decorated ever Royal Naval aviator. He holds other records. As a test pilot, he flew more types of aircraft than any other test pilot ever. 465 airplanes. He was the first to land a jet on an aircraft carrier. He was the first, what was the other thing he did that I'm forgetting right now? I'll come up with it in just a second. But he was, he's just a great aviator. In addition, he spoke fluent German. So at the end of World War II, besides flying all the German airplanes, he was asked to go over by the British government and interview the former leaders of Germany. And so he interviewed Willy Messerschmitt, Werner von Braun, and Hermann Goering. So this guy has an experience that was unequaled. Well, and he could spin a tail. And so we all sat there absolutely mesmerized listening to these two great aviators tell us their stories. So now I get to the technology part. All right, there's Bob on the left, and that's Eric Brown in the middle, and that's Neil. Let's see, who else do we have here? The second gentleman, the tall one, that's Andy Green. Then, of course, Bob, and that's Neil. And finally, this is the picture of this gang. If you look at this group after dinner and realize the number of firsts in aviation and space that are standing there shoulder to shoulder after dinner in London. It was a remarkable evening, a remarkable experience with remarkable aviator astronauts. And it was a privilege, Bob, to be there with you on this journey, and thank you for setting up this trip. It was a privilege to be part of that with all of you. Thank you all very much.
And I was sitting next to David, and here's a guy that's interviewed over 10,000 people on national TV. He's met everybody. All of us are in such awe. He's literally pinching my leg under the table. Can you believe this? It was incredible. So we're going to invite up a couple of other speakers. Next, we're going to have Nissen Davis, who's the immediate past president of the Aero Club of Southern California. He's a board member of the Flight Path Museum at LAX. He's a director of public relations of Morale Entertainment, our foundation that took these people to the Middle East. He's retired from the aerospace industry in 2004 after 30 years with Flying Tiger, McDonnell Douglas, Hughes Electronics, where he held senior positions in public relations, advertising, and communications. My favorite role is that Nissen was the chairman of the Golden Globe Awards at one point, so you might want to talk to him about that later in the day. And he's going to discuss an important event that's coming up at this fantastic museum we're at today. So Nissen?
First of all, I'd like to thank one more time David Price and the executive director of this museum, Dan Rang, who so graciously let us use this room today. Round of applause for David. This museum is an institution that is unique in aviation history. It started out as the Douglas Museum and Library under Don Douglas Jr., and then morphed into the Museum of Flying on the north side of SMO in 1989. We loved it. But despite its popularity, the museum was temporarily closed in 2002 due to economic hardship. But it reopened here on the south side, in this site that you're in right now, and in 2012, and has been growing ever since. If this is your first visit, please take time to look at the outstanding exhibits before you leave. My favorite is Don Douglas Sr.'s conference room, which is up on the next floor, with a magnificent round table and the globe of the world in the middle that lights up. I love to use that room for board meetings. A new chapter will open here in this museum on Saturday, June 7, when the museum's new subsidiary, the California Aviation Hall of Fame, inducts its first 4 honorees, who are Buzz Aldrin, Bob Hoover, Clay Lacy, and Frank Robinson. In addition, the Hall of Fame will recognize 19 legacy inductees who shaped the growth of the aviation industry in California. And they are J. Leland Atwood, Jackie Cochran, Glenn Curtis, Jimmy Doolittle, Donald Douglas, Amelia Earhart, Ed Heinemann, Howard Hughes, Kelly Johnson, Dutch Kindleberger, Roy Clavenshoe, Alan and Malcolm Lougheed, Paul McCready, Jack Northrop, Arthur Raymond, Ben Rich, Claude Ryan, and Theodore von Karman. Tickets for this event are available in the lobby. The process for selecting honorees is quite simple. Members of this museum submit their choices to a blue ribbon selection committee, which then recommends the final 4 to the board of directors. If you want to submit a candidate for 2015, you need to hurry, as the voting ends on May 31. So you can join the museum at the lobby here today or on the website and tell us who you think should be inducted. The 4 successful inductees for next year will be announced at the banquet on June 7. Like David, I got to know Bob Gilliland much better on the tour that we took, and I had the pleasure of sitting next to Bob on one of our longer legs. I'm sort of a talker. I don't think I said a word from LA to New York. I just sat and listened to Bob, and I hated when that plane landed. He is an amazing storyteller, and he loves to tell them. Now, as you would imagine, the astronauts tended to attract the limelight of the attention. Obviously, nobody wanted to discriminate. We certainly didn't. But everybody knew who Neil Armstrong, Jim Lovell, and Gene Cernan were. Not as many people knew Steve Ritchie and Bob. And so, you know, they graciously would await their turn, and we just accepted that for what it was. But a couple of times, the non-astronauts had their day. I remember when we landed in Sirklik Air Base in Turkey, and you had your F-104 patch on, and the general was welcoming us from the Turkish Air Force, and he had the same patch. It was like two lovebirds coming together. You know, none of these astronauts, man, it's that guy there, the one sitting at the table. So then we went on, and our last stop was in England at Mildenhall RAF base, and a similar incident occurred. Only this time it was Bob Gilliland's turn to shine, because RAF Mildenhall was where the SR-71s, the CIA's SR-71s were based during the Cold War, and everybody knew Bob at that Air Force base. And oh yeah, you've got some astronauts too, but let's talk to Bob. And so I'm pleased to join in and remember that this airplane, the SR-71, probably was one of the greatest weapons in ending the Cold War. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is going to be Joe Kittinger, who is a former United States Air Force Command pilot, a career military officer, and retired colonel in the U.S. Air Force. He participated in Project Manhigh and Project Excelsior in 1960, and as most of you are well aware, he set the record for the longest skydive from a height of 19 miles. He was also the first man to make a solo crossing of the Atlantic in a gas balloon. And then at the age of 84, he participated in the Red Bull Stratus project as capsule communicator during Felix Baumgartner's record-breaking 24-mile freefall from Earth's stratosphere. Joe.
Well, we all love Bob Gilliland, but I make the challenge that I've known him longer than anybody. We've been friends for 64 years, and I don't believe I can beat that. Sherry and I were delighted when Robert Jr. invited us to this celebration to honor his father. In 1950, Bob and I were in the same fighter squadron, stationed in Lüneburg, Germany, flying P-47 Thunderbolts. And for the next 2 years, we went from there to the F-84 to the F-86. And that really was a golden era in the United States Air Force. You could have a drink without somebody learn about it. When I entered in 1953, Bob ended up flying the fastest aircraft in the world, the SR-71, and I ended up flying the slowest aircraft in the world, a balloon. But we both set records in our vastly different aircraft. And Bob Gilliland, without a doubt, is one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's got the most fantastic memory. I challenge anyone to be more astute than Bob Gilliland. You know that we've been blessed that we're here. You might not know that God has a guardian angel that's purposely qualified. And when folks go up into space, he alerts that guardian angel. And that guardian angel took care of me several times, and I know good well he took care of Robert. And by the way, it also helped take care of Felix Baumgartner when he jumped from 128,000 feet. Bob Gilliland is a gentleman and a great American, and I'm proud to call him a friend. And thank you, Lord, for keeping Bob Gilliland around so we could have fun with him. But neither one of us ever imagined he'd be living this long anyway. And Robert Jr., I want to please ask you to be sure to invite Sherry and I to his 100th birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We had a guest with us today that was not on the program, but asked to have an opportunity to make a presentation. So I'd like to invite up Jamil Dada, who's with the March Field Air Museum, to make a presentation. So Jamil's walking up right now.
Thank you for letting me crash this. I've gotten to know Bob and Rob really well the last 10 years or so. It is my privilege to be the president of the March Field Air Museum. March Air Force Base is a 97-year-old, largest Air Force, one of the most historic Air Force bases. In fact, it is now a multi-services base. We have Army, Navy, Marines, and Air National Guard. The MQ-9 Predator flies out of there as well. It's one of the four-corner alert sites where we have the F-16s that are 24/7 manning the skies. And we have a wonderful museum there. We have 76 aircraft, but our crown jewel is Bob's beloved SR-71. Now, Rob, when you were speaking earlier, you mentioned all these words that people had described your dad, and every one of them depicts your father very accurately. I'd like to add another word to that vocabulary, and that's humble. This man is so humble, it is amazing, as iconic as he is, because whenever we have a special event and he wants to come over to our museum, and he says, I can only come for 2 hours. Is that okay? And I'm like, absolutely. Whatever you can do, we would love to have you. So he's there for 2 hours, and there's all these people lined up to talk to him, and kids lined up, and his assistant says to me, he needs to go. We need to get him out of here. It's 2 hours are up. So I go over to Bob, and he says, no, I want to talk to all these people. I want to sign all these autographs, and I want to tell stories. And 3 hours later, she says to me, he's got to go. And I'm like, what can I do? In the courtyard of our wonderful museum, the March Field Air Museum, last year by congressional action, by Congressman Ken Calvert and Senator Barbara Boxer, we now have the official Distinguished Flying Cross Memorial is housed at March. And Bob, I wanted you to know that our museum has actually installed a tile at the Distinguished Flying Cross Memorial in your honor, so your name is on there. And I want to just read this little certificate that I want to leave with Rob. It says you are truly a visionary aviator, and our museum is honored and privileged to be connected with you through your beloved SR-71. We are installing this tile in your honor at the Distinguished Flying Cross Memorial, and we are officially making you an honorary March Field Museum board member. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Jamil. That was terrific. Our next speaker is going to be Dick Rutan. I know everyone here is aware that he piloted the Voyager aircraft around the world nonstop. He's earned dozens of service awards, including the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, Purple Heart, and the Presidential Citizens Medal, amongst others. And in July of 2002, Dick was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Dick, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hey, did y'all read this thing? You know the number of airplanes that Bob Gilliland has flown? Holy bananas, what an envious record of all those airplanes. Another thing is that we talk about pilots. And an airplane pilot is a pilot when he gets in the airplane, and when he moves the controls, the control surfaces move. Now, during your lifetime, all those airplanes that you flew did all that. And then there's another paradigm that happened in a computer. Some guy worked making software back in Asia someplace. The pilot moved something and a computer flew the airplane. And it may even be that in the near future, that actually the pilots won't even be in the damn airplanes anymore. So anyway, those of us that got to fly during that time, it was really an honor. Time's gone by. Now Bob is probably the most generous person you'll ever meet. And his generosity was offered to me one day, and he says, hey Dick, I understand you go to Mammoth and you ski and do snowmobiling. He says, I have a cabin up there, and anytime you want to come up and stay in my cabin, you're certainly welcome. Anyway, he said it a couple of times, and so I took him up on it. So I went up there in the dead of winter, and the cabin was, all the heat was off. And I got there about noontime, and we went in and turned the heater on, and we thought we'd go out and play in the snow for a while, and then come back in the evening and enjoy this cabin. But what we did was that there was a pipe that froze. And when we turned on the heater, it heated it up just enough to melt the water, and his cabin was flooded. Anyway, Bob, sometimes your generosity will come back to bite you sometimes. But anyway, it's an honor to know you and to be able to fly. Boy, look at the name of those airplanes you've flown. Wow, I'm envious of that. Happy birthday, Bob, and many more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Our next speaker is Brigadier General Steve Cinco Ritchie. He is America's last Air Force pilot ace, shooting down 5 MiGs in Vietnam, including 2 MiGs in 89 seconds, which is an amazing story to read if you've never actually read it or seen the videos. He was also one of the youngest instructors ever at the Air Force Top Gun Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base. And he was one of the few second lieutenants selected to fly the F-104 Starfighter that you've heard about today, immediately following his initial pilot training. He's the only pilot in the world to become recertified in the Starfighter more than 40 years later. And Cinco was with us on the Legends of Aerospace tour in the Middle East. General?
Well, thanks again to Tom and Sally and Jamie and the museum and all the people who made this terrific day possible for all your work. It's just a fabulous event, and we're so pleased to be here. Bob, first of all, I want to thank you for coming to my 70th birthday party 2 years ago at the William Lyon Museum. That meant so much to us. I wanted to do this without notes, as David did mostly, and as Dick Rutan just did, but I've been saying so many things recently that I'm not supposed to, that Tom had to review my notes, and the parts in yellow are the parts that he disapproved. So here we go. To try to give you a sense of what it's like for me to be a speaker here today, you need to rewind about 35 years to the Los Angeles Air Force Association quarterly luncheon at the Proud Bird, which I think is still there. Is it near LAX? Anybody know the Proud Bird? So I was invited to be the luncheon speaker there for the Air Force Association. I get there, and I find out that in the audience that day would be Bob Hoover, Kelly Johnson, and Tony LaViga. And I was a major, I guess, at the time. I was so nervous, you couldn't believe it. Well, I did the talk. The audience was receptive. Bob and Kelly and Tony were very gracious. And obviously, it's a day that I have never forgotten. Well, fast forward now, more than a third of a century, to Bob's 88th birthday party celebration. And with you leading the way, Bob, we are surrounded by a room full of aviation greats. And my history makes barely a blimp on the radar scope compared to these terrific people. I was truly honored to be even invited here today. Now, a lot has been said about our tour in 2010, but let me give you just a little bit of insight, I guess. Imagine being with Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan, and Jim Lovell, and Bob Gillilands. How I made that cut, I don't know. Evidently you needed 5 and my call sign was Cinco. So I got to go. And 5 has been a good number for me. I was born on the 25th of June. My high school football number was 15. My Air Force Academy football number was 25. My first car was a 55 Ford Crown Victoria. I was in the 555th Fighter Squadron. And, oh yeah, 5 MiG-21 ones. So so that number's been good for me, and it's good for you because I only have 5 minutes, and my timekeeper Jim tells me there are only 2 minutes left, and we actually have 7, I think, Tom. And Mariana's going to do the last 2 minutes because she grew up in Romania under communism, and she loves me because I killed communists, and she's going to tell you just a little bit about that. So back to a bit of the scoop on our tour. 10 days, I don't know, 20,000 miles, half a dozen countries, busy, long days, short nights. Okay, no more time signals, only 1 minute left. Is it okay if I go over just a little bit? So you can imagine, every now and then things got a little bit testy. Some of us complain once or twice, or 4 or 5 times, or 8 or 10 times. Everybody but Bob. Bob never complained, never one unhappy word, unkind word about anybody. In fact, I started off first couple of days sitting in the back with the astronauts, and I got tired of listening to the grousing, so I moved up and sat with Bob. Because he never had a complaint about anything. He was always happy and cheerful, and just happy to be there, and it was such a pleasure to be around him. Now, I did get upset with David, because he gave about twice as much time to the astronauts as he did to me and Bob. I said, David, what the hell is this? We're fighter pilots. Monkeys can be astronauts. Well, what I didn't understand is that he understood that they were there to see Neil Armstrong, Gene Cernan, and Jim Lovell. And that was pointed out very clearly when we went to Incirlik, and we were invited to speak at the university there to all the students, and thousands of people. The streets were lined. It was like a mini New York ticker tape parade. But they wouldn't let Bob and me speak because we had combat experience, and they don't want anybody who might have killed somebody talking to these students. Can you imagine the Turks? Anyway. So the astronauts spoke, the crowds were unbelievable, and that's when I figured out that David Hartman knew what he was doing. And while we were there, and they were there to see these astronauts, and rightly so. As I mentioned, Mariana grew up in Romania under communism, and she is going to say just a couple of words about what it means to her to be an American, and how much it means to her, for those of us and those in the audience who have fought for our country and died for our country and our freedom. Sweetheart?
It's a great honor for me to be here. I've always grew up dreaming that American pilots will come to rescue us and do whatever they needed to do, and dreamt of a secret spy plane. I didn't know what it was called or what it looked like, but I was convinced it's American and it's somewhere out there. I am living proof that everything that Bob risked was not in vain. It made a great deal of difference, not only to Americans here, but to oppressed people all over the world. The reason I know that is because I am one of them. So in their name, I would like to say thank you, Bob, and thank you to all Americans for everything you've done. It did make a difference, and the world's a better place because you're in it. Happy birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Cinco and Mariana. And lastly, I'd like to invite up my lovely and beautiful wife, Sally, who helped organize all the food and drink today. And she's going to say just a couple of personal words and to close us out today. So, Sally.
Actually, I said I needed to say a few words to Bob, so that's why I got to be here today. But my perspective on Bob Gilliland is maybe a little different than most of you that have worked with him. But I just want to tell you, Bob, one of the things that I've observed over the years and experienced is how when you're speaking to someone, they feel like they're the only person in the room. And that's quite special. So thank you for that. It's a wonderful trait to have. And on behalf of everyone here, I think I can speak for them and say that we are thrilled and honored to be here to celebrate your 88th birthday. Happy birthday, Bob. And if you all would help me sing happy birthday to Bob, I think we need to sing happy birthday to this lovely man. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you.
And now we're going to ask Bob to come up here and just say a couple of words. So if we could make some space for him to come through, that would be terrific. I just have to point out while Bob is coming on up that Ian and Tina Scully here made this amazing cake that you just have to see with all these chocolate blackbirds. He literally molded a blackbird at the office. We worked together, and so that he could make these chocolate pieces, and it's a spectacular cake. So I just wanted everyone to see that. We'll put it out so people can look at it as we finish this part up.
Are those blackbirds edible? Beautiful. Oh, thanks so much. You take them, please. Can you turn that light out? I can't see everybody.
Sure, absolutely.
This is an overwhelming event, to say the very least. And I've had so many of my friends here, I knew nothing about this thing. I didn't know what was going on, and it's all been perpetrated by the co-conspirator, my son Robert. And after hearing everybody say what they did, I'm overwhelmed. And I was going to tell you a little about the very first flight of the SM-71, but it might take a little too long here. But I wanted to recognize Steve Justice. Is he here? They made a mistake. Where is he, Steve?
Right here, bro.
There he is. Come out here and let him see him. Wave at everybody. He's a very, very tall guy. He still works for Lockheed Martin, by the way. And they got the remnants of the Skunk Works are up there in Palmdale right now. And he's been described as, if you can believe this, as perhaps the new Kelly Johnson. So, thank you all for coming to sure. Well, I'll try to tell you a little bit about how I got to be with Kelly Johnson and so forth. Tony LaVere, who was the chief pilot for Lockheed, was a friend of mine. And he and also Lou Shaw was a year ahead of me and a graduate of West Point. I graduated in 49 from Annapolis, he in 48. And so he had already been hired by Lockheed from up at Edwards, and he was already inside the Skunk Works, and I didn't know what they were doing. And I had a Mercedes-Benz then, and he used to live out there in Pacific Palisades, and I said, can you pick me up if I take my car down to be serviced in Hollywood? So he did, and it was a pretty day. It was in March of 62, I think it was, or 61. And so he says, and it was a beautiful day, and he had a convertible, an English car. He said, how would you like to come over here with me? And I said, I don't know, tell me about it. He says, I can't. I said, how do I know I want to come over? He said, you don't. So that was the way it was presented to me first. And so I was worried at first it might be one of these things that goes up like Herman's salad, another like it, that's probably go like that. If there's something like that, I was going to speak sayonara and go back to 104. I was flying to 104 7 days a week back then too. And so anyway, Kelly Johnson called me over in March, and he said, I've been investigating you, and LeVere and Lou Sharp wants you to come over here. And he said, so come on over in about 2 weeks. So I said, well, that's great, except for one thing. LeVere wants me to go back over to Europe on the 104 program. And I said, and he said, well, we don't have any hardware yet, so maybe you better go do that. It's in the best interest of Lockheed. And so then he says, but then he says, when you'd go in his office, and he would always have the door closed, and his secretary was out there, and he said, everybody, I want to be called Kelly Johnson, except the secretary said, she talks to all these guys back east, and it's too confusing calling him Mr. Johnson there and Heck Kelly over here. So she was the only one that had the exception on that. So Kelly says, but I've been investigating you and the 104 stuff. I know you like that airplane. So then he says, stands up and he says, but I want to tell you, I got something here that's faster than the 104, goes higher than the 104, goes further than the 104, and then he stands up and says, let's go ahead and take a look at it. And near his office there on the factory floor was the first one. It wasn't a Blackbird then, it had that titanium color. And so that's how it all originated there. So now I'll just talk about the first flight of the thing. How I got to be, I forgot that part. I had heard that we had 2 Mach 3 airplanes in the family, and I'd flown both of them, and that was the single-seater and also the so-called F-12A, which is an interceptor. And they were all have the same kind of titanium on them, so they were all limited to 3.2. Another thing about 3.2 was the engine manufacturers down there in Palm Beach, Florida, were insistent we don't go over 3.2 because that's the only engine made by Pratt & Whitney or anybody else that could go at maximum power all the time. Otherwise, you hear those airplanes take off and then pull the power back. But this thing went at maximum power all the way, and they were worried about going any faster because the dang engine might blow up. In fact, it might have killed this one guy over there in the Philippine Sea. But so when I heard about the SO-71, which has had the big bucks behind it, I went down to Kelly and I said, I hear we are going to have a new program, and I would like to get on it. He said, to me, he answered, he said, well, I hope you'd be saying that. So that's how I got on it. And so back to the first flight now, it was made out of Palmdale. My son Robert had several errors in there, but I don't want to go through correcting all of them. He said also World War I was fought over in Germany. Well, no bullet was ever fired in anger on the German soil in World War I. When he was talking about my dad, it was in France, northern France. And so, anyway, I went to Kelly and he said, "You be the guy on the airplane." So we went up there, Kelly and I, to Palmdale, where we had some big hangars, and they were putting the thing together. And I said, I don't think we're going to get this thing together by the end of the year. And Kelly says, nope, I'm not postponing anything. He said, if I postpone things the way people wanted me to, it'd still be in the jigs. That's what he said, the jigs. And so I thought, well, if it isn't ready, we're going to go. What I didn't know then was about this deadline. And also, we had talked about the things my son Robert talked about, but what I didn't know then was about the money deal. But he and I had agreed that if it didn't go when we happened to go on the 22nd, that we would go on the 23rd, or Christmas Day, or New Year's Eve. We all agreed to all of that. And so it so happened we got off on the 22nd. The weather was pretty good. And I had 3 chase airplanes. It's a good idea to have chase airplanes anytime you've got an experimental airplane, because you got all that instrumentation in there and you try to look in, fool around with it, and you can't look around properly. And so on this flight, we had 3 chase airplanes. All of them were F-104s. One was a single-seater that you saw in the video already with Jim Eastham chasing me. And so the other 2 were out of Edwards, and 2-seaters, and they had a cameraman in the back seat of each. And so afterward, Kelly gave me a picture, about 6 minutes of the first flight, abbreviations and so forth, and you can see the scratches on it because it was a camera. And so what we did was, and so Kelly and I discussed what we would do on the first flight, and then he signed it and I signed it, and he says we agree that we'll do that and nothing but that. So that's professionalism, and that's what we agreed to do. If we want to have any discussion about anything, we want to do it on the ground in advance. And that way you don't have to have a consultation with yourself when an emergency occurs. So we took off to the west of Palmdale and climbed right on up to about 25,000 feet subsonic. And then we pulled, we got the 3 axes of flight. We did experiments on the various axes of flight. And then I headed up 395, if you know how to get Sierra up to the Mammoth. You go east due north, and the High Sierra on the left-hand side on the west. So I wanted to go up there around Bishop and then turn around and head down to where Palmdale is again. And so it's in the winter there, 22nd of December. So we knew we'd be dropping a sonic boom if we could go supersonic. And so, and by the way, the Pentagon says nothing's insured above 50,000 feet. So I had a low altitude suit on, just like I'm sitting in this chair now, a 104 outfit. And so Kelly says, well, if everything works right, we will go right on up to 50,000. And that was ideal, we hoped, because everybody would have been happy if we just took off and never raised the gear and came around and landed. That'd been successful. So, and as I headed south, I added power, put on the burners, and at about 1.18 Mach, I suddenly got a big red light up front, and it said canopy unsafe. So I pulled the thing back to min burner, and it started slowing down, and then the light went out just above supersonic. And so then I looked around, and the canopy, I'd had this happen before, by the way, and so I decided as you go forward, the canopy shape gives it a little lift. And I thought maybe it would give me a little micro switch lift, and this micro switch has triggered that light. And I can assure you, however, if I'd gone ahead and had something wrong, those engineers would have been all over me and said, what do you think we put that big red light there right in front of your eyeballs? So I decided to ignore it. So I went on down there and went on up to 50,000. And by the way, when the CIA interviewed me, they said, if you take any notes about anything here, that's a security violation. So I said, that's great, I hate paperwork. And so I never took any notes on anything, especially it was so secret. And Kelly himself was rather paranoid on security. And so we got down there, and we had put in more fuel when we decided to go with the gear up. So Kelly was over there with these generals, some from back in Pentagon and some from SAC, because this was supposed to be a SAC airplane, a Strategic Air Command. And a lot of people don't like SAC, they call them, they say they've been circumcised by those guys. Anyway, Kelly said, how about a flyby? So we did one, and that's the one we saw here. And then he said, how's the fuel? And I said, fuel's fine. And then we did another one. So this time, this airplane has fuel dump on it too. And so it suddenly malfunctioned and started dumping fuel on the flyback. And Kelly later told me that these two generals were with him, and one of them nudged him and said, "Hey, what's that?" And then he said about that time he was sorry he'd asked for the second flyback. And it's not dangerous, so this floor came on around, as long as you got enough fuel to go around. And I came back on and landed, and we have pictures of all that. And I remember the drag chute on it, which is 40 feet, is SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. And therefore the brakes are very, very weak. They could be made better or stronger, but that wouldn't have been better because weight is anathema to performance. And then when that drag chute comes out, it grabs you like you're landing on a carrier, which is a good feeling. You don't run off the other end. And so you dump the thing at the far end. And I noticed on the first flight, we held the nose off and it touched the drag chute gets hot if it touches the concrete. So after that, we would lower the nose so when it deployed, it wouldn't harm the chute. And so then we taxied back in, and that was it, and everybody was real happy. So that was it. Thanks very much for everybody coming, and I'm very, very grateful to one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So that's the end of the formal part of our presentation. It was supposed to last about 25 minutes. We went a little long. But please feel free to mingle in this amazing audience that's here, get to know everybody. There's still plenty of food and drink over here. We've got the museum for a while longer. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. And Bob, we love you.